Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Fraley. It's my great pleasure to be the chair of the undergraduate photography and video program here at the beloved School of Visual Arts. On behalf of everyone at SVA, please welcome. I also just wanted to give a big thanks to PDN, and in particular to Lauren and to Holly and to Monir. We're very grateful for them to be doing this each year, not only in terms of them encouraging the emerging talent, but also sharing information about their careers with you. It's a really admirable thing to do. Thank you very much. And without any further ado, Holly. Yeah.
Thank you all. It's always a pleasure to be back at SVA. We have done this a few years here, and the questions are usually good. We're going to have a Q&A with the audience later. No pressure, but we've gotten thoughtful questions here from a talented group of students. So, oh, I forgot my prop issue. There's some copies of PDN's 30 out in the hall. I'm the editor of PDN, which means I'm one of the 4 editors who look through about 300 portfolios by photographers who've been working professionally for 5 years or less, and select 30 to profile. Our photo editor, Rebecca Robertson, is here, who's one of the folks who make the selection, looking for photographers who offer versatility and creative vision. And the profiles in the issue are them talking about what it takes to kind of what it took them to get from being students or being assistants and become actual working photographers, making a living doing the kind of work that they love. And I'm going to be asking them to talk a little bit about their work and their path and sharing some useful information. And we also have here a veteran photographer. I'm trying to put that in a, sorry, but I don't know, everything comes out loaded. I'm delighted to have a member of the Sony Artisans of Imagery program talking a little bit about what it takes to really sustain a career, both professionally and creatively through experimentation. And a photo editor will be talking a little bit about how what she maybe is looking for when she hires photographers, beyond just great pictures. So I think I should first, before I introduce the sponsors, ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Hello, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Winnie Au. I'm a photographer in New York.
And who are some of your clients, Winnie?
I work with Elle Magazine, New York Times, Harper's Bazaar Japan, Refinery 29, Coca-Cola, people like that.
Winnie will be showing a mix, I think, of some editorial and some advertising work, right?
Yep.
Next, who are you, please?
Hi, I'm Ina, and I'm a photographer in New York.
I'm just gonna stick to the easy questions for a minute, Ina. Where did you go to school?
A School of Visual Arts.
Yeah.
Jeez. That's the expected response, folks. And you have a gallery here in New York who represents your fine artwork.
Foley Gallery.
And who are also some of your clients for your commercial work?
I have worked with New York Times Magazine, Time, Refinery 29. I'm just copying you. Shiseido, and Wako, which is a lingerie brand in Japan, and Isetan department store, and that comes to my mind just right now.
And so we're going to get to see a little of Ina's work in a minute as she talks a little bit about what's been up with her since she left the hallowed halls of SVA. Yes? Who are
Hi,
you?
I'm Jacobi Adam. I went to ICP here in New York City, and I'm a documentary photographer, and I've had work published in the New York Times and Al Jazeera in Rangefinder Mother Jones, and I'm beginning to work with some NGO clients.
And Mr. Veteran Photographer.
I'm the old guy. My name's Andy Katz. I went to school at Art Center College of Design in the late 1800s. And Yeah, I do a lot of books and show my work in galleries as well.
You have a mix of work in your slide presentation. I mean, we know you as someone who's published books of your travel photos, published work from beautiful places in the world, but what did you think when you graduated from Art Center you were going to be doing for a living?
I actually always wanted to do exactly what I'm doing now, but it took a really long time to do it. I was photographing anything from dogs to black boxes with one red light to anything.
Congratulations on getting to do the thing that you're passionate about. And the client on the end?
My name is Emily Keegan, and I'm the photo director of the Fader magazine.
Are you also a photographer by any chance?
I am.
I hope you can talk a little bit to both sides of the experience, both as a photographer and someone who hires photographers. I want to give a shout out to the folks who make the PDN's 30 issue and these events possible. We're lucky that we get to partner with some companies who are interested in helping photographers succeed. And I should give a little introduction. Mark from Canson is here. Mark, want to wave? You're going to, applause. You're going to see Mark outside. We're going to be, after everyone's presentation and the Q&A, we're going to go out and have a party. And that gets applause too. I can see it's going to be a big applauding crowd. We have folks from Sony here, our big sponsor. Did Mark or Jean actually come to take a seat? Are you here? I think we'll see them outside where they're guarding their wares that they want to show you. I also want to thank the folks at ASMP, the trade association, who give merit memberships to all the PDN's 30 each year as another way of welcoming them into the professional community. Do you want to raise your hand as an ASP member? Yes. And your name? Erica's over here, and they'll have folks from ASMP to talk to you. I got no more introductions. I'm going to ask each of the photographers and Emily to talk a little bit about their work, and we may have questions for each other, but we'll save the questions for the Q&A. Winnie, you're up.
Okay, so hi everybody. Thanks everybody for coming today, and I guess I'll give you a little quick background about myself. I shoot here in New York City, and I came from Rockford, Illinois. I went to school at Boston University and studied advertising. Then when I graduated, I started studio managing and assisting in Boston, and then from there I moved to New York City, where I studio managed some more, and I digital teched. So I did all of this for about 10 years before transitioning to shooting on my own. The work that you see behind is going to be a mix of editorial, commercial, personal work, and a promo piece. So one of the main questions that people ask is how I made that transition from assistant to photographer. So for me, I kind of thought of it like investing in myself as a small business. When you're assisting, you're working a lot for other people, you're really busy, and so I found that I had little time for myself to invest in my own career. So what I really had to do was save up enough money so that basically that I could quit and have money to live on while I had no income. So basically when I turned 30, I fired myself from all my assisting gigs. Mm-hmm. And then I spent about 6 months kind of setting up a new life for myself. I decided to refine my portfolio, work on my website. I met with a friend who works in marketing and got advice. So one of her big advices was make a marketing plan. And I guess I went to school for advertising, so it was a little more helpful, but most people don't know what that is. So in a marketing plan, you do things like figure out a schedule of ways you're going to show people your work. So examples of things you can do for that include your printed and online portfolio. And when you're initially making your website, I recommend making just a few very carefully edited bodies of work versus throwing up everything you've ever shot onto a website. I think one of the things that you're selling to editors and art buyers or whoever your client may be is your ability not just to shoot, but also to edit your work and have a vision. Additionally, there's a lot of other things you can do that are free. So all these free things are great. Social media, which you guys probably know about. Some people hate it, some people love it. You have to kind of learn to like it enough so that you can do it, because it is a really big, important part of marketing. And it's a great way to stay in touch with people and really get your work out there. Something I used initially and still use now are email newsletters. And so I use a service called MailChimp, and it's free. And basically you spend a lot of time making a list of people who you want to talk to. And once you do, you send them some photos and hopefully someone will get in touch with you. So I was really lucky, and in my first few emails, I landed some of my first editorial gigs. Other things are printed promos, submitting to photo contests, trying to get in-person meetings with editors and art buyers. All these things are ways to market yourself.
Winnie, I'm curious, how did you, did you have a dream of who you wanted to work for? How did you figure out who you wanted to send your promos to? How did you figure out who would be right for you?
It took a while, but I did. So one of the things my marketing friend suggested was to kind of come up with a list of dream clients. So when I actually quit and kind of thought about, I got to make a career for myself, she told me to think about where I could see myself in 5 years. So who, knowing that sometimes those clients aren't attainable right away. Everyone wants to maybe shoot for American Vogue, and maybe that's not going to be your first job. But there's stepping stones, and it takes, a lot of little steps to kind of get to that goal. So at least if you know where you want to land in 5 years, it'll give you some kind of key target points. What else? I guess from the perspective of an assistant, if you are an assistant and you're trying to transition to be a photographer, then I think it's important to realize that you're going to take a pay cut, and it might be painful, and that it's still going to be worth it, because even if you're making a comfortable living working for someone else, if your goal is to shoot your own photography, then you need to invest in doing your own shoots, and you're only going to learn and hone those skills if you actually do it. Other things I was going to discuss include what to do when you land your first editorial gig. So this is something that there's really no book about it, I guess, but when someone comes to me with an editorial job, I typically ask a lot of questions. So for first-time clients, you often, you'll get a brief, maybe a short email from an editor saying, we have this project you might be good for, can you do it? And I think, without being too annoying, it's good to hash out the details beforehand. So you kind of want to know what you're walking into. You want to know how many images you have to deliver, what is the story about, things like what is the angle of the story, and what are your deadlines, what is some of the lighting and style direction that you guys want to do, and just general logistics of the shoot. In addition to that, there's always the fun paperwork part. So typically, if it's a first-time client, there's going to be a contract either sent to you, or if it's a smaller publication, a lot of them don't have contracts. And in that case, I recommend giving them kind of a standard terms and conditions, your own sort of contract, so that different details, especially copyright, are figured out. I don't recommend signing a work for hire contract, and you often will be asked to do that. So make sure you review everything and understand what you're signing. Additionally, you're going to discuss budget. So remember that typically people either have a budget in mind for a lot of magazines and they'll tell you what it is, or they will say we have a day rate and here, what are your expenses? That's kind of what I've had happen with me. So just be prepared to discuss the estimate beforehand, and again, try to get all that stuff done before you actually do the shoot, because it's not great if it happens after. Another thing I wanted to talk about is what happens when you get your first advertising job, and kind of what's the difference between that and editorial. So one of the main differences is once you get in the running for an advertising job, there's almost always a triple bid. So it means you and 2 other photographers are being presented to the client by usually an ad agency. So in this case, you actually have to sell yourself a lot more than in an editorial where people typically have already assigned you the job. So you have to get really good at selling yourself, which sounds funny, but it's kind of difficult to learn, and you have to get good at talking to people about it. One thing we do a lot these days is put together treatments. So the clients are expecting kind of almost like what film directors do, where you'll get on a creative call, you'll talk to the agency about what the campaign is about, and then they want you to kind of tell them how you're going to execute it. So they want to see images of how you're relevant to the campaign, and they wanted you to discuss the process of how you're going to do everything. So it's really something that you want to spend time on, and it's actually a very important part often of whether or not you get a job, especially if they don't know you beforehand. Once you get the job, then congratulations. And it basically involves a bit more production and management leading up to the shoot. There's usually at least a week of meetings and phone calls and casting and dealing with pre-pro meetings, and you work closely with your producer to make sure everything is going to go smoothly. The good news is on the actual shoot day, I found that it's pretty much the same as any other shoot, except there's a lot more people around, there's a lot more people staring, but you actually have a lot of support with you at that point, and a lot of the problems have been solved. So sometimes it's easier than an editorial shoot because you have more help. The other thing I wanted to bring up, just in terms of what kind of work you want to put in your portfolio when you're showing your stuff to people, is that it's not enough to just take a pretty photo. Your images, they need some sort of context. So I think when we're taking pictures these days, think about the shoes that an editor or art buyer might be in, and generally they see thousands or millions of photos. We all do. So in order to stand out, you really need to go beyond just taking a beautiful picture. It has to be a beautiful picture that means something. So I found that when I showed my book, my early book, to editors and showed them some stuff, they'd be like, oh, that's a nice picture, why did you take it? And then I kind of would fumble and be like, I don't know, it looked nice. So that's not really a good answer. So it's better if you have formed, an idea of why you have a body of work together. And it's sort of same thing goes for when you're putting your portfolio together online. I think it's nice to write captions and give people context of what these pictures are about. And it gives everything some meaning. So that's all I have.
Do you think that did working as a studio manager or an assistant and helping other photographers run their business, was that a useful business education, would you say?
Yeah, I think it was immensely helpful because I spent a lot of time organizing other people's lives, and when it came to doing it for myself, I had a good basis of what had worked and what had not worked, basically.
Did it sort of help you understand like how photographers talk to clients and do all those kind of tricky things you're describing, like treatments and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, when I started, people didn't have to do treatments as much, but
No, yeah.
I did listen in on a lot of client calls, and I feel like that was important, just understanding all the back and forth that tends to go on behind the scenes before a shoot actually happens. And sometimes there's a lot of politics involved, and just watching other people navigate those spaces, I think, is important.
Yeah, people say mixed things about assisting. I mean, I've talked to assistants who say, well, I basically swept the floor for a lot of photographers, but I don't know. But then I also hear from people like you who kind of say you get to see how a business is run. So what's this?
So this last slide is a promo I did recently. It is a small zine that I published. So basically, I try to do at least one printed promo piece a year. Really, you should do more. But it took a while to put together, so that's why. But it's an overview of the work that I did over the last year, and I do a lot of environmental portraiture, so this is a nice way for me to showcase kind of a mix of all the people and spaces that I see throughout the year. So it's called Way Over Where. But every time I publish a promo, I kind of give it a different name.
It's an achievement. Thanks. You've raised some questions. I'll come back to you in a second. But Ina,
Yes.
are we starting? Is this early work?
Yes, this is the work I made for senior year at SVA. Can I start talking now? Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to share my work and my experience so far here tonight with audience today. And okay, I need to calm down. Okay. I'm a little nervous. Today's slideshow have some of the personal work as well as some of assignment I had so far. And so I'm sorry, I have allergic reaction to this weather right now. And a little bit of sketches I had put in the middle, so you can see a little bit of my process in working. I work in both in commercial and fine art. In my mind, there is no definite distinction between two words, but yes. Okay. My work is about poetic relationship among things and spaces, memories and identity. And when I work, I try to do many things with hand. So there are a lot of manual process in the image making. I like cutting stuff, and I like also gluing and coloring, all this stuff, just to make myself having more fun in image making. And I like playful and minimal quality of my work. Just to talk about a little bit about how I started getting assignment and started getting representation from galleries, I'll have to go back to my senior year in School of Visual Arts. I went to BFA photography. I graduated BFA photography in 2010, and then continued to study at MPS Fashion Photography from 2011 to 2012. When my senior year, I had a solo show on the second floor of the photo building. And that was followed by a mentor show. And from these two events, I had a very warm and supportive reactions from the faculties who hadn't seen my work before, and the photo editors who visited mentor show. So, which gave me an opportunity to share my portfolio with editors, and that led me to shoot for New York Times Magazine and Time Magazine in the following year. While this was happening, I wasn't quite sure what I'm going to do with my work when I graduate. I wasn't sure about what is agenda for my work. I understood that my work has a strong fashion and design aspect to it, but I didn't feel like it was very commercial enough to show around. But at the same time, I was enjoying so much just making work for myself, so I wasn't sure what I'm gonna do after graduate. So I decided to look into contest. And EAR, International Photo Fashion Festival, and Foam Annual Talent came to my attention since I really liked what they had put in the past years. So those two were my definite goal when I was still in school. Like, I want to be in these two contests. So while I didn't realize that when I went to school, now I think about it, knowing where I want to belong in the future really helped me shaping my vision. So if you're still in school and in a pretty similar situation where I was before, then I strongly suggest to think about where you want to be. If you want to shoot for a magazine, think about which magazine you want to shoot for. It's very different aesthetic that each magazine has. You should really look into what kind of client you want to have in the future. Also, if it's gallery is your goal, you have to think about which gallery you want to be at as well. So from these two contests, luckily I was accepted in both in that year. And being in Foam magazine helped me a lot to get international exposure, especially with the gallery directors. My first gallery director in Europe found my work through Foam magazine and decided to invite me to be in a part of group show. Since then, he started representing my work in Europe for 4 years, as well as the one in Tokyo, who found my work through Foam and a solo show in Taiwan. Also, the show was proposed from Foam. And these two occasions had me started working with these two galleries, both in Switzerland, and the other one is in Tokyo. And from being in EAR Festival also led me to start shooting from some of the fashion clients. So one of my first fashion editorial was for Jalouse magazine, 12-page story I did in 2012, I believe. I was still in school. Since then, I wanted to, I think the sketch is coming up now, okay. So I wanted to talk about my process and difference between collaborating with the client and working for myself. So these are the sketches I do all the time for myself, and that goes same for the client as well. When I get approached by or get emails from the editors or commercial clients, I always send out a bunch of sketches, ideas, some ideas I had before or some fresh new ideas for the specific jobs. And from there, I try to come to a conclusion with the editor or the client to do specific sketch. Let's make this sketch to happen into photos. And from there, I talk with a team of hair, makeup, stylists to realize these images, these sketches in real life. And that happens, that helps me a lot when I talk with a team of people, because when I sketch ideas, I often forget the fact that I work with 3D human being, human body, so some things are impossible, but I always try to make it happen with the team, and it's always nice to be asked those questions. How are you gonna do this, Ina? Like, it's impossible. You can have just two models and not having distance between them. Things like that. But it helped me to understand. As I do this more of these jobs, it helped me to understand, oh, I really have to think when I make sketches that I work with people. It's simple as that. These are the samples that correspond to the previous sketch. All the covers I did for Hanatsubaki magazine in 2014. Hanatsubaki is a culture magazine by Shiseido, the cosmetic company, and they had this magazine for about 100 years in Japan. It's not, you cannot buy it, I think. So this job came to me after the director of the magazine saw my work at the solo show in Tokyo. and they wanted me to have complete creative freedom to make these images. So I pitched a bunch of sketches again, like the ones you saw before, and made it. It was fun shoot. I think it's one of the dream job you can hope as a photographer to having this creative freedom to make anything that you ever dreamt to make. I'm supposed to talk about something else, but I completely
Well, it
forgot.
must be because you were describing like when you're making your art, and you were saying, I wake up in the morning and I have an idea and I work it out. You said you work out some of your photographs on your radiator.
Yeah,
Yep.
I still do.
Oh, on your radiator. So that just seems so different to me than like, okay, we've got the model and the stylist and the wardrobe person. Do you like the collaboration with a big crew on an editorial shoot or advertising shoot?
Of course. At first, it came to me of a little bit of stress that I have to work with a lot of people. Not necessarily because I have to work with people. I think I was a little more nervous that whatever I do is being watched by other people. But now I got better at it. So I think that was the part I try to talk now. Thank you.
Okay.
And then, I think try to balance your initial vision and also what team has in their mind. Like in between those two is very important. And while doing edit, you also need to remember that you want to walk away the shoot with a proud image, with an image you love. So you have to be a maestro who can orchestrate the whole song. You need to listen to each sound and try to make a nice harmony out of it. So yes, that is the difference now. Because when I work for myself, I can be as stubborn as I want to be. So it's always interesting to work with other people and see what comes as a result as well for myself. And sometimes I walk out the shoot with a better image than I could ever done by myself. So I really appreciate those kind of opportunities. So I completely skipped about talking about editions.
Oh, right.
I wanted to
right.
talk about how I got gallery representation, then had an advice for students, especially in the audience. When I was in school, since I didn't know what I'm going to do after graduating, I kind of completely neglected all the valuable classes we had at SVA. I never
There's a moral to this.
like gallery. I think there is a course about how be represented by a gallery. Like they will teach you how to edition your work, how to make labels for back of the frame, or how to issue a certificate of authenticity, and all of these because I didn't take school seriously. I'm sorry, Stephen. I had to do it after I graduated, and it took a lot of time for me to revisit it, entire my past work, and think about it. What size am I gonna print? How I'm gonna edition it? How I'm gonna title them? All of this took a while. So if you're still a student and if you have access to amazing printers at school, I strongly recommend you to print out every work you have that you are proud of, and also play with sizes, print it out, touch it, fold it, cut it, do what you can do when you have this physical work. Because once you graduate, you will be out of those chances to use the printer as like amazing printer at 3 a.m. That's for example. And I try to take that class. I still don't know the course name because I never paid attention, but there is a class, and please take advantage of it. So right now, after balancing my work between doing personal and also assignments, I kind of decided in the past year that I want to make more work for myself. It just came to me after realizing that I didn't really have a lot of work done for myself. So I decided to do some artist residency. Past year I did a residency at Swatch Art Peace Hotel in Shanghai, which gave me a great time to think about my work and redefine what I want to do and update my vision. And also I've been working on editing my first book, which will be out soon. And that's about it. I think I'm at my last slide.
That was a lot. I can't believe Stephen would be mad at you because in the end you gave an advertisement for the printers at SVA and the value of classes if only you take them. But I think one of the things that's interesting too, I mean, you mentioned that you were lucky the gallery kind of gave you advice about that stuff. But I mean, I hope people leave an evening like this realizing there are colleagues that you can turn to sometimes for the business advice that comes up that is sometimes hard. And I hope people recognize they can turn to the photo community. That's my plug. Jacobia?
Hi, yes. So I'm Jacobia, and I had a career before I started photography. I sort of worked in academia, and I have an unfinished doctoral dissertation, and and I worked in publishing. And a few years back, when I had kids, I started doing a lot of baby photography, partly because I sort of enjoyed doing this at home, and then people enjoyed my pictures, and I started charging for my pictures. And because I had babies myself, I knew a lot of people with babies, so I got to photograph their kids. And then I realized I wanted to be able to tell stories, and the pictures that I was interested in at the time were not just the cute pictures, but also the pictures that showed more drama, and the children crying, and the diaper change going crazy, and I really enjoyed those pictures, and I wanted to find a way of being able to tell stories about people. And so that's when I had a hunch I might want to go to a photography school, and I was first interested in doing an MFA. But then I did a workshop in Germany, and these are the first two pictures you're seeing here. I'm showing 3 different bodies of work tonight. And I worked for a week as a documentary workshop in an animal clinic in Germany. And it was actually a clinic for cloven-hoofed animals, for goats and pigs and sheep. And I loved the work. And what I found out during the week is that documentary photography was amazing in the way that I get to take pictures, but I also get to learn a huge amount. So I get to step into lives that I have nothing to do with, and only because I had a camera. There's no other way you can step into an animal clinic and say, hey, I'd like to hang out for a week. And so this is when I really realized I don't want to do an MFA in photography. I don't want to wonder whether my pictures are art. And I had already applied to an MFA program, but then applied to the documentary program at ICP and got in 2013. And when I was at ICP for a year, the way it works is you do a lot of different classes, and you have one main project, which you'll be working on anywhere between 3 to 6 months, depending on how early you can tie down a story. And the project that I ended up doing was a story on the prison buses that leave New York City every Friday and Saturday night, and with which people go and visit their loved ones in prisons, which are often very far away, up at the Canadian border. So these are 24-hour trips. And I did 6 of these trips, and the project was eventually published in the New York Times. And it's kind of the project with which I became a photographer, which means I felt calm and good about saying to people, I'm a photographer, which is a really important step in being a photographer, because people have no idea what photographers do, and the more convincing you sound about, and thrilled you sound about being a photographer, it sort of helps people understand what you do. And it was also the project that I realized that, so when I studied at ICP, I was first a little worried that I was the only mother in the program. I was one of 3 parents, and I thought everyone's going to be socializing all the time. I'm going to be going home to my lovely kids, but I'm going to be missing out on a lot of things But I realized that something interesting happened during the year was that because I was a parent, I got access to stories that almost nobody else got access to. So I was really cool in the program. I mean, I'm 44. I was one of the oldest people in the program, but I got access to the housing projects we were supposed to photograph. I got access to the families on the bus because it was mostly women and children traveling, and I could say, I have 2 small kids too, and I can't imagine what it's like to do this journey, so tell me. So in a way, I found, even though when you look at most of the media outlets, a lot of the documentary photographers probably still are male, that there's a huge area in which women can do amazing work and probably have a little bit easier access to. So this is the story in a way. So it was published in the New York Times, it got published elsewhere, and I find that a lot of the things that happen sort of career-wise in documentary photography is always a stepping stone to something else. During my year studying photography, I don't think you have to study photography to be an amazing photographer, but in my case, it really helped. And not only in terms of finding out, how do I photograph well, what are the technical aspects, how do I tell a story, but the people I studied with are also still my peer group. If I have a question, they're the first people I turn to. And I think that's really important in a business that's otherwise really solitary. You're sitting at home, you could be staring at your pictures for 3 weeks, but you need to do something with them. So you have your 4 or 5 or 6 trusted people, and you say, who are the editors? What am I doing wrong with this project? And you need, I think, the cohort to be able to make yourself vulnerable and ask all the questions about why you're not getting the work right, or whatever other questions you have. So one of the ways that I approach documentary photography is I always think there's a problem and I'm there to solve it in a way, or there's a question and I'm here to answer it. So when I think of work that I want to do next, I usually ask myself, what is there I want to know more of, or what is there that would be really good if the world knew more of? I sort of have a fairly strong social conscience, so the work that I've been doing so far sort of revolves around vulnerable communities and vulnerabilities in life in general. So I sort of approach the projects, there's a question I have, I want to see what something is like, and then hopefully this is a question that other people are moved by too. And in 2015, I spent the summer in Berlin, and that was just at the height when every day thousands of refugees would come into the city. And I had already, before I went to Berlin, decided I wanted to document Syrian refugees. And I was working with a translator, and they were all telling me these stories that I felt were unimaginable, walking with 2 small children through 10 countries for 40 days, trying to stay out of the sight all the time because you didn't want to be picked up by the police because you wanted to make your way all the way to Germany or Sweden or Holland. And so once again, I thought, we housed a Syrian family at our apartment at some point, and they told me their story, and their kids were basically exactly the same age as my kids. And I thought, I cannot imagine. We know this is happening in the world every day in a way. We have 60 million refugees in the world, but these were refugees who kind of ended up on my doorstep. So it made it all much more immediate. And so I decided I'm going to do the journey. And originally I saw myself, it was a little gung-ho, I saw myself in one of those rubber boats. I didn't go in one of those rubber boats, partly also because I realized I'm not a writer. I can't just buy a new pencil when I get to the other side of the coast and my gear got wet. I was a photographer, and there was no way I was going to, it was just too risky. And so I went to Turkey, though. I went to all the places the refugees had told me about that are key in the journey. And I tried to find one family that would let me follow with them. I didn't succeed doing that because everyone was way too afraid to see their name and age and hometown published, and it would keep them from ever returning home again. But I made the journey with different groups of people and traveled to Germany. So I didn't manage to publish this project in one of the conventional media outlets, but it's going to be in an exhibition in Germany next week. And what it has given me is sort of an inroad with various NGOs, which is sort of the work that I see myself.
Maybe you should explain what an NGO is.
A non-governmental organization. So, for example, what happened after I did this work, I sent it around to the International Rescue Committee, Mercy, and all the big organizations that are involved with refugees. And I said, this is the work I've done. I just want to let you know. And I ended up actually selling images to the International Rescue Committee. And it hasn't paid back the money for my trip, but I would have done the journey anyway, knowing I'm probably not going to earn back the $2,000 or $3,000 that I spent on it. But it's sort of given me, a way to communicate with NGOs now and say, this is the work I've done, and you're doing work in this area, and here's a thought I had about how we can collaborate on something. I want to say a few words on sustainability, though, because these 3 projects are personal projects, and they're not paying the rent. I don't know at what point in your career they pay the rent, but there's a large amount of work that I do that is invisible on my website, but that actually pays the rent, and that I also enjoy doing. I do a lot of event photography, I do portraits, I still do a lot of family photography, and it's great practice, and it's really nice. I mean, when I was asked by a cultural organization in the city, can you do our events, and is this beneath you, or could you do this? And I'm like, I'm going to do this, because that monthly paycheck is basically what makes me feel good about all the other work that I do. And I'm sort of slowly, after a few years of having done this, coming to a point of sustainability. I hope it's going to be even smoother in the future, but I think in general it's really good to know that documentary photography, and especially if you follow the projects you really want to do that are important to you, they mightn't be the ones that sustain your career, and you sort of have to, I'm trying to, whatever work I do, it is photography, but there's a large body of work that you have to do and enjoy it while you're doing it, that you have to do that actually pays the rent and pays the rent and maybe more in order for you to pour the money back into the personal projects.
I'm just curious, Jacobi, you said it's good practice doing event photography and portrait. I've heard that before, that we've had people on the stage who also do weddings and say it's really great practice.
Yeah.
How is event photography good practice?
So you can't prepare. And so the event photography that I do is often people sitting at tables giving talks. It's probably the least visual thing in the world you can imagine
like this?
photographing.
Like this?
For example. But I have to deliver 30 pictures at the end of the night, and they can't all look like the first one. So I really enjoy, thinking, well, is there maybe yet another angle, especially if I photographed in the same space 40 times before, is there another angle? Can I do something a little crazy? Can I try something out? Can I actually, even though I'm only paid $250 per event, can I maybe bring my light stand and set up people in the corner for a portrait and just, do something that I feel like trying out, because at the end of the day, this goes back into my portfolio. And so I'm trying to, and I also meet interesting people at these events. It's amazing. I find it amazing that even though we're surrounded by images, I still have to explain to people what I do as a photographer. I find this remarkable when people say to me, oh, you also take portraits. And I'm like, that's what I mainly do in order to pay my rent. But so it's good to, go to events and meet people, and who knows, I might be emailing Winnie in 2 months' time saying, hey, you did this really nice, little magazine. Can you tell me how you do it? You have to be good at talking to people and being outgoing. I'm not a good salesperson for my work. I'm excellent when it comes to my friends' work. But you have to sort of still educate people what it is and what you could do for them as a photographer. Does it answer your question?
Yes, no. I think we've heard a lot about being able, I think it's a kind of skill that we don't hear enough about from photographers, like being able to present your ideas, to explain your ideas, to be able to present your work, to put it in context. It's just an interesting thing that I think we don't necessarily think about. It's important for photographers to be sort of verbal as well as visual in a way, but verbal. That brings us to you, Andy.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Sony and PDN for inviting me here. I love doing these. We haven't done one in a little while. And I also have to say, this is the first, I'm very honored to be surrounded by really talented women. This is the first time I've ever done this event where it's all women. So
We appreciate your willingness to be the token on
yeah,
stage.
I'm the token guy and the token old guy all at once. And I don't want to be a buzzkill here, but I just want to. When I went to Art Center, the first bit they said, out of everyone here, there'll probably 10% of you will be making a living in photography. And I spoke at Art Center pretty recently, and I said that it can't be that high now. And they said no, it's not that high. So my advice is this: one, the greatest gig on earth is being a photographer. And if you are passionate about being a photographer, if that's the only thing that you want to do, and you cannot do anything unless you're a photographer, become a photographer and you'll be successful. If you're thinking about, should I be a chiropractor or a photographer, or anything, don't do it. You really,
I wish you hadn't gone to
really-
chiropractor.
I don't know where
but
that
anyway,
came
I
from.
know.
don't know.
Okay.
You know, pick a subject.
Okay.
But you really, really have to be super passionate about it, because there are so many ups and downs. It's a very, very difficult way to make a living, and but it's like I say, if you have the passion to do it, if that is the only thing that you want to do, you'll be successful and everything will be great. You might have some really crummy months, but I do that right now. But in any case, the other thing that I would really suggest to everyone is really shoot. If you have downtime, there's really just go out and shoot and come up with projects. I've always been a big advocate of coming up with projects, and if they're projects on, I did a project from children from around the world. If they're, bridges of New York, subway stations I hate, something, just do a project and end the project. Come up with a little portfolio, make prints, and mount them beautifully, and have them as your little, baby that came out of this project, so you can see what's going on. The other thing I would strongly suggest is don't show your work until you are really proud of what you're showing. And if you have 10 images that are fantastic, and you have 2 images that are really good, only show the 10 images. Because people, you don't have time to look at tons of work. And if you show 10 really, really solid images, that could spark someone's interest. If you go and also present them really nicely, don't go in and say, well, this is a 5x7 that I had from the other day, and I've got to, make it really clean, really concise, and then people will look at your work longer than before. I've done a lot of books. I was lucky enough, or I'm still lucky enough, to do projects and end up in books, because I think that's a wonderful way to finish a thought. And in this day and age, there's some wonderful, wonderful places you can go to, like Blurb, where if you do a project, you can actually present a book that looks exactly like a book. It's really a book, which is just the coolest damn thing. I love that. And I was doing this project on India, and I did Blurb books to bring with me to look at the books to see what I needed to do, that, I've got this missing and that missing. Do those, present those, and they're really, it's a great way to force yourself to go out and work and work and work. Also, at the beginning, and sometimes in the middle, and sometimes at the end, you've got to pay for your rent, so you're going to shoot anything. But if you are totally want to be a fashion photographer and think it'd be easier to be a portrait photographer, I think it's a huge mistake. Go with what your gut says. Really, really focus on the subject that you love and really want to work on, because as everyone knows, it is a tremendous amount of work. You picked a career, which, like I say, is the greatest career in the world to be in, but it's also probably the hardest. So if you're going to do something and you're going to exert all this energy and all this enthusiasm and blood, sweat, and tears and this and that, you might as well pick the actual subject that you are the most passionate about. Now that could change on you. I mean, you could decide you want to do fashion photography. That could change to something else. But start off with that on your mind. And, you know, one thing could lead to go into gallery work, and, you know, everything kind of leads to something else. And, you know, I think a lot of us talked about, you know, communicating with friends and mentors and about advice. And most photographers, I think, are pretty nice people. I had a project, and I called Jay Maisel, one of the top photographers in the world. He spent about a half an hour on the phone with me discussing this project I have. He didn't have to do that at all. I mean, you know, so people are generally very, very good about giving advice, about suggesting where to go, and things like that. I just think it's very, very important.
Do you take calls from young photographers who want advice?
I take calls from anybody that wants to talk to me, and I take emails from anybody that wants to talk to me. And the only time I don't get emails is if it gets to spam, and I always feel like a jerk when I'm 100% on that.
But I mean, you teach a lot, and you are still willing to give advice to people in the in the coming up
100%.
industry.
And I ask for advice too. Yeah, it's a pretty important part of the whole thing. You're never finished with this. It's always a learning process, and it's always things that you're learning.
Well, you were mentioning only putting out the best, you know, the work that you feel strongest about. But are you a good editor of your work? Do you have any advice for being an editor of your work?
I'm not.
Since some photographers aren't.
I've got ADD like 99% of photographers. So when I edit my work, I just spin around like a wild man. I'm not good. You know, I edit it, and then I edit it again, and then I edit it again, and I keep on going. I'm not good at that.
Okay. No advice. No advice on that. Or
On editing?
is that something you turn to your peers for? I think.
No, I end
many
up doing
people-
it myself. It just takes forever. You know, I do, because the problem with editing is you get very emotionally attached to an image. I had a black rhino attack me in Namibia, and it was like a close call, and I took a picture of this, and the picture was actually a pretty mediocre picture, but it was such an important picture to me. I wanted it everywhere, and people went, you know, that's the same type of thing. You know, you talk to somebody that, you know, spent all day, and they finally got the image that they wanted to get, and they get it, but it might not be that great. And it's really, I also think it's very, very, you know, anybody can come up to you and go, oh, all these images are great. I really like it when somebody goes, I don't like this image. I mean, I don't want somebody to go, you know, all your images suck. That doesn't help. But I do like it when somebody is critical about it. I've got my buddy in the audience who's an art critic for BBC, and he tells me what sucks and what doesn't. It's really very, very helpful.
Early work?
This is very early work. I did a project on vanishing Jewish societies that I went all over areas where there was a lot of Jews, and because of World War II and the Nazis, there were a lot fewer, unfortunately. And I went to concentration camps, and then I went to Israel. This was taken in Israel. This was on top of a roof. I'd probably get shot if I was doing that this day. And that was a exhibit that traveled around the world.
So you always had, this is where you always had your travel photography in mind. And now what's
Yes.
this?
I just have to interrupt.
Oops.
So on a completely different note, so I produce wine. My son is a winemaker, and I produce wine. And this is going to be a wine label for our. And what I'm going to do is sideways. It's really hard to see that there's a breast and side of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print it really dark to get it through. You got to get it through like the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms too. It's funny how alcohol and firearms are together. It says a lot, doesn't it? So I'm going to make it really dark so you can't tell anything. And then when I print the label, I'll bring the shadow detail so you can see a nipple. And I'm hoping that the ATB will like say this cannot be here anymore, and I'll get all this free publicity. Anyway.
In other words, you have a marketing plan.
I have a marketing plan, exactly. But these are all different projects. I was very fortunate that a friend of mine, and this is generally what happens to photographers, because this was from a project on wine. The projects I do on wine, I never show pictures of wine bottles, but I had a friend who had a restaurant in Boulder, Colorado, and he was moving to Vail, Colorado. And the only thing I knew about wine is if you drink enough of it, you got a nice little buzz going on. But that's about it. I wasn't that into the different varietals and this and that. So he took me to Napa and Sonoma because he was moving to Vail, Colorado, and he was going to do a restaurant based on American wine. So he hired me to go to Napa and Sonoma and photograph. I spent about 8 or 9 days doing that. He taught me a lot about wine. He was really, really very knowledgeable. Met all these great wine people and came back, put a portfolio together, and went back to Domaine Chandon and Jordan Winery and showed them my work. And I immediately got gigs from that. And then I got gigs after gigs on that. And then I got my first book deal from that, and then I did a book for Robert Mondavi.
And you went direct, you weren't going through some agency or
No.
designer, you went direct to the wine company and talked to them about
Yeah,
their
to
story.
the marketing director and talked to them, yeah.
And the wine pictures have mostly been collected in books, right?
Yeah, these are all, I've got about, I've produced about 13 books, and about half of them are wine-oriented. And there's several reasons why I do that. One is I love wine. 2 is there's always great food there. And 3 is they're usually in really pretty areas. I just finished a book on Bordeaux, which is a lot of fun.
On Bordeaux. Somehow this segments poorly with the pregnant person, but I'm going to, no, it doesn't.
And also it's great, refugees and really important stuff to...
You're also
my fluffy pictures of Bordeaux.
You're sandwiched between both. So Emily, I feel like we've heard some good advice here. I hope that after all this, as the photo editor who actually hires people, you're not going to say, no, that was terrible advice. You shouldn't
feel like I
edit
don't
your
have to
work to the
speak.
best. No.
I kind of have exactly the same advice. Just throw this out. So I am the photo director of the Fader. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do, and then give you just a little bit of advice, which you can ignore probably, and then just go through photographers' work and talk a little bit about why I was drawn to them, and then how working with them, what our collaboration ended up looking like. So the term photo editor, I think, is a little bit of a misnomer, because at the end of the day, the editing of someone's work or the going through someone's film is kind of the least, it's what we do at the end of a project, and we don't do it very often. So what I spend the most of my time doing is brainstorming photographic concepts or treatments for a story, and then finding photographers whose voice and talent can articulate the story and the stories that I want to tell. And once a photographer is on board, then I work with the photographer and direct him or her to build those visual stories. So it's more like a creative director, but focusing on photography than an actual editor. We do go through film, and we do, what do we call it now? I don't know.
Files?
Files. We do go through files. We pick some. That's editing, but that's really the extent of that aspect of the job. So for those 2 that I had up there, just quickly, the concept on the left was for Rihanna, obviously. The concept was I wanted to have Rihanna take her own photograph. So I found a photographer, first of all, who would be willing to work with us on that, because it meant giving up some of her, relinquishing the shutter release for one. And on the right with Davido, I wanted him definitely in his pool and kind of coming up out of the water and kind of a fresh image. So both of these were highly directed and then working with a photographer to execute them. So moving on. So for advice, I have kind of 4 things that I would suggest doing. The first is to find your voice, which we've said over and over in this panel. The second is to build your team. Third is to be weird. and the fourth is to move to Chicago. So this is the work of Mark Peckmazine, and his voice I found immediately stunning, and started working with him. I think he was right out of school. For him, it's all about film and treating a photograph after it's been shot in the darkroom. And he also has a very strong lighting sense. It's kind of retro. So when it came time to photograph Drake, my first thought was Mark. And one of the reasons I wanted to work with someone who shot film specifically was because I didn't want the celebrity to see what was happening. In celebrity shoots, there are a lot of people with a lot of ideas, and often when you're shooting digitally, they can veto an image before really anyone has a chance to work on it. So we wanted to photograph in Toronto because Drake is from Toronto, and so is Mark, and so I felt like that was a really great connection. The other really interesting thing about Mark is that he has a terrible stutter. I didn't know about it until I met him, and it is an incredible tool for Mark. When he ends up getting people to spend more time with him, to slow down, and most celebrities and like big personalities aren't expecting it, and I've found that working with him for portraits especially has been just kind of an amazing experience. So this is a young photographer named Ronan McKenzie. I found her work through Instagram, but the top left is her website. One of the things I really love about her work is the way that she manipulates bodies, the way that she can find shape where other people don't find shape. And that I noticed she was able to photograph both models and regular people, quote unquote, in a similar fashion. She wasn't asking a model to strike some pose and a non-model not to. She was just kind of bold and asking both. So when I had a shoot coming up, since I had never worked with her before, it was this pretty small shoot, an artist named Winnie Au. This is what she did. And you notice with her work, she isn't trying to do a lot of different things, right? She's able to, the way that she works with people is really unique, but she's also saying, hey, I'm a film photographer. I use this kind of camera. This is my look. And for me, that's reassuring. I'm not looking for someone who can do everything. I want someone who has a real vision or a real voice. So the next photographer is Renata Raska. This is the photographer I ended up working with on Rihanna's shoot. And one of the reasons I hired her is because she was a woman, and I've noticed that Rihanna had a very specific kind of pose with male photographers and was much more open and loose with female photographers. So I was looking through a bunch of female photographers. I wanted someone based in LA, though that was kind of low on, people would be willing to fly anywhere for Rihanna, really. And I wanted someone who was chill enough to release the shutter, so to speak, and step back and allow this moment to happen. So the other picture of Rihanna, you'll notice has some tie-in with Renata and Rihanna. This was a hard shoot for that very reason. There's a lot of names flying back and forth. Renata brought a lot of her team with her to the set. She brought her set designer, she brought her prop stylist. We brought a wardrobe stylist, but I wanted a lot of the images that she had on her site, I wanted to feel like a lot of the images she had on her site. So she said, oh, no problem, my team can bring those things with us. So the set was really her vision. So this is going still with on the have your vision and build your team. This is another photographer, female photographer named Alice Rosati. She's based in Paris. I found her work, I think, through Tumblr. And again, I was drawn to this ability to find the surreal in the everyday. And I thought she has just a great vision. I also noticed that she continually worked with the same stylist. So when I was needing someone in Paris, I gave her a call, and she said, oh yeah, I would really like to work with the stylist I always work with, which really made the shoot come together. So these are, I mean, I love these shots. I'm not going to be shy about it. But not only was she able to find great moments, but she also, these garments are important. The props and the garments that she and her stylist brought to set mattered. And I kind of knew it would. So that falls under build your team. This is Maisie Cousins. I would say she's pretty weird, and that's why I hired her. Next. Another one, Liz Renstrom, currently the photo editor at Vice. I hired her on the basis of her senior thesis from Parsons. And this is what we did together. What I liked about her is that she was kind of just, this is who I am. She wasn't trying to be anything but it. And lastly, Ting Chang, based in London. I saw the picture on the left and I was like, I need to work with this woman. And
What is that?
that is a sandwich shoe.
What size?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so while I had a really pretty boring assignment, we can go to the next slide, I knew that she would bring her quirk to it. And it's just a hit of quirk, but it was enough. And actually, these were kind of the most boring, straightforward of the group, but it was Bloomberg Business Week, couldn't really show sandwich shoes. So, okay, so this is the work of Ben Rasmussen. When I said move to Chicago, basically what I meant is that location matters for a photo editor. Often I'll get a story that's somewhere exotic, like Chicago or Denver. And
Chicago and Denver are horrified. Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
And so my advice really is that the more you work, the better you work. And so if you are in a place with fewer photographers, you're going to get more work. It might be not the greatest work ever, but you'll be working more. This is the work of Ben Rasmussen. He's based in Denver. And he is the go-to person for editorial in Denver. I mean, it's unreal. He pitched this. This is like early work of his. The next slide, something that is a portrait that I worked with him on at Bloomberg Business Week. I've seen him become like just this keystone in editorial photography, and I think it's partially because he's been able to get the work. Gunnar Stahl's based in Atlanta. Besides moving to Chicago or Atlanta or Denver or LA strangely is small too. Gunnar's whole work is based, all of his personal work is based on the people that he hangs out with. So when it came time to photograph one of the people that he hangs out with, I thought, it would be really great to actually hang out with the person. Instead of sending someone from outside of the group, I wanted to capitalize on the intimacy that Gunnar has with a guy by the name of Metro Boomin. I don't know if you know him. But so this next image is of Metro. Not yet published. Yay.
No one reveal.
But hopefully it'll go to press tomorrow. And lastly, Leonard Greco, based in another small city, Boston.
You could have stayed there.
I know.
Shouldn't have moved.
Leonard has a really interesting kind of relationship with photography and history with photography. I worked with him a lot on the magazine Sup, which was a music magazine that kind of no longer exists. And then he shot something for us for the Fader. And lastly, this is the photographer who shot Davido for us, the cover. He's based in Cape Town and does fashion and portraits around Africa. So when I had to go to Africa, I called him.
There you go.
His name is Travis Owens.
Sorry, Emily raised a million questions, but it's time for Q&A from you. So I was going to pipe up with questions. But audience, This is being videotaped, by the way, not in a Big Brother way, but just to share with other audiences. So I'm going to ask you to stand up with your question and speak clearly, but I'm probably going to repeat it, not because we can't hear, but it helps the camera person. So you have a question? Is a husband of a panelist allowed to ask the first question? Oh, no, you don't have a question. No, I'm good. You were just nervous. A question for the audience, or are you going to make me ask the first question? Come on, don't you have any questions for any of the photographers? Or yes, please, in the front row. So the question was to Jacoby, talking about the women on and families on the prison bus, like getting access. Did you need to cajole, or how did you go about working that?
So, I mean, in that situation, being a parent is only one component, obviously, but I think showing up frequently was another big thing. It's not, I mean, I wasn't able to take any pictures or any meaningful pictures the first 2 or 3 trips, but once I introduced myself to people on the 4th trip and I said, this is my 4th trip, they're like, who takes this bus trip, you know, for the 4th time unless they're serious? But certainly the intro, introducing myself, because I wanted to photograph, I was drawn to the bus because of the children traveling on the bus and because there's a lack of policy making sure that parents who are incarcerated are closer to their children. It was a sincere sort of curiosity, as in, I couldn't imagine taking my children on a 1-hour bus ride. How do these people manage taking them on 24-hour sort of trips, you know? It was a good intro, and I think it made people trust me a little more as a first thing. But obviously, to trust someone, many things come together. Me showing up many times was another thing. But I'm still in touch with some of the people that I photographed, and they have kids, and I have kids, and you know, we can get together, and the kids hang out when we. I mean, it's not necessarily a friendship, but it's checking in on each other once in a while, and it's just another component that gives you a connection to someone else. It's not necessary. I'm not trying to sell this as a strategic connection, but it is something else that, you know, there's a large part of the world where being a working mom is problematic, you know, or you sort of have to divide your lives in different spheres. So I just wanted to throw in earlier that I was surprised actually and learned it only during this year that sometimes what you think is not going to be helpful might be actually the path that gets you a foot in the door. And in that case, it was being a mom. But I do think the world is full of untold stories. I mean, we see the world probably gendered to a certain degree, and there's a large reservoir of stories that are untold because maybe the photojournalists so far haven't thought about the stories or haven't gotten access to. But being a woman and having a specific access is another way of thinking of this as a tool, basically. Yeah.
I think there was a question in the second row. No? Another question? Yes? The question was about learning to be a salesperson and then learning to be a business person, which was described as the non-magical part of photography. I'm just repeating that for the camera. So what if each of you describe maybe like the biggest step or the most useful thing for how, in the process of learning how to do the hard-nosed stuff in photography?
I guess on the sales part, it was practice, but I think a lot of it was my own personal self-confidence, and I think that takes a long time to grow. So a lot of times you feel good about your work, sort of, or like you're building your work, but you don't feel confident about, I don't know, throwing it out in the world. I think a lot of times it feels like you're bragging. And I think initially, you know, I was just kind of practicing, you know, showing people your work is different than bragging about it. You're kind of sharing it with people, you're not pushing it in their face. So I think understanding that you shouldn't be ashamed to show your work was kind of something I had to get over for myself. And then in terms of running a business, it's just a fact of life. I don't like it either. But I would suggest that, I don't know, if you've never learned about business, either read a book or take a class about it. Like, it's they're all very practical things that apply to every industry, food, like arts, fashion. Everybody has to go through it, and running a small business is very difficult. So I think it's an important challenge you have to overcome. If you don't, I don't think you can succeed. I don't know.
I'm really bad business person or salesperson. I don't proactively promote my work necessarily. I just always think that I just have to make it work. I just have to make it work and put out there, and let's see who's gonna love it. So in that sense, I think I'm just probably just still being naive about it. The only thing I would do in terms of being in a good relationship with the editors or the clients I worked with before will be around the holiday time. I'll just send out a card, handwritten, or emails, personal emails with a new image that I recently made. That's only promotional thing or business side of it that I can imagine that I'm doing right now.
I'm not sure I have a good answer. So, I mean, there's two aspects. I quite enjoy talking about my work because there are often stories that I'm interested in. And so I have a little bit as of an advantage saying, oh, there's a story that I found out about and I'm thinking about photographing it, or I have just photographed it. And people tend to be interested in the stories. In terms of how, so I think you just have to at some point be good at saying, you know, your name and in one sentence, what photography you're interested in, what maybe the last project is you did. So I do a lot of event photography, so I have to be good at talking to people also. You just have to assume, we're photographers. I've never met anyone who hasn't said, oh, that's cool, hearing you're a photographer. So often people want to hear more. I think if you really enjoy the stories you're telling, you'd be quite good at sharing this. I can imagine it a little bit, or I would find it trickier selling conceptual work. But I sort of continue telling people the stories that I was interested in the first place and why I photographed something. But I do a little bit of social media, but I don't. I do it consistently, but not. But I'm not sure I'm doing it sort of properly. I'm doing it in the way that
no one does. I mean, no one knows if they're doing it properly.
Who knows? Yeah, I'm sort of winging it. I mean, I sort of have a few rules. You know, the kids don't go up on Facebook, and I'm trying to keep sort of Instagram somewhat consistent. Don't photograph my breakfast. Something like this. I try to have a picture and a story attached to it, and I use it as a professional tool more than as a private tool, I think. There's a little I can add to this.
I think getting your work out there, and I think one really good way to get your work out there is doing something pro bono, because you can do annual reports. I did something for hospice that got a lot of work from me that was a total pro bono thing, and there's lots of people need photography, and there's a lot of phenomenal organizations out there, and it's just a good way to present your work to different people. It might get you a gig, it might not, but at least you're showing your work and there's work out there. As far as business, I've never met a great artist who is a great businessman, or a good artist who's a good businessman.
Yeah, I'm skeptical about that. Well, anyway.
I'm sure there are, I just haven't met them yet.
Let me ask you this, Emily. You're giving assignments. You're not giving. I mean, you work with and collaborate with some photographers who are.
You get an assignment, and you get an assignment under your chair.
With some people who may not be super experienced, but but you're choosing them for other reasons than like. I mean, you've explained why you choose them, but are you willing to help them through negotiations with and contracts and publicists and all that stuff? Do you help advise them?
Yeah, I work with a lot of young photographers, and partially it's because I work with a budget that would make non-young photographers walk away.
Oh.
But to be perfectly honest, which is to say you should always ask for more money. That's the first thing to ask for. And then take it anyway when they say no. yeah, I'm always happy to help new photographers out in that way. Regarding reaching out to how would you get your foot in the door, or how to reach out to someone who at a magazine or an art buyer or whatever, I got 2 emails recently. One said, "Hey Emily, when are you going to give me a job?" The other said, that was it. The other said,
That was from me.
the other said, "Hey Emily, I've been a huge fan of the fader." First of all, start with flattery, always works. Huge fan of the fader. I really loved what you did here, here, and here, and I think that my work would be a really good fit. Turns out it was a really good fit, and I'm really excited about this photographer. It turns out he's 16 and still in high school, and so he can't shoot a lot of the things I want him to shoot. But you know, summer's coming, so. But the difference is that one person was kind of a jerk. If you're nice and if you really feel like you are a good fit for the place that you're contacting, that's the first step. On that same note, regarding promos, the amount of promos that end up in a recycling bin is very, very sad. So I don't know what the answer to that is, except
Well, I can't help noticing, Emily, you mentioned Tumblr, you mentioned Instagram. I mean, is
I
that...
procrastinate a lot. I think that's where I find
Okay.
photographers, yeah.
Because you've already seen them somewhere and decided to follow them, or because other people you like follow them? I mean, how did you find...
Yeah, I think it's luck. I think it's somehow in the ether. Kind of feeder blogs are really helpful. It's Nice That is one that I look at often. Dazed I look at often. The blogs that pick up personal projects. I mean, I think the kind of underlying, what I'm hearing today a lot is that your personal project will get you work. The thing that you're passionate about will get you work. And that will get picked up by feeder blogs that then are looked at by kind of a larger audience.
Yeah. Okay. I've also heard, I feel like there's also a theme here about like you get better. Do you know what I mean? Like that's been expressed. Like you keep working it and working, and you'll get better. Yes. Advice on making promotions, an epiphany about a great designer, or great treatment, or great something, great.
I mean, I can.
Go.
I don't think there's any one like magical designer or magical, it's all about your vision and your concept of the piece. But one thing that I think other art buyers have told me is that the giant promos that look really awesome get thrown away a lot, unfortunately, because they don't fit on people's desks. So sometimes it's not, big can be great. We all maybe know that, but it can be not effective if the person you're sending it to has so many promos that they have nowhere to put it. So that's one thing I've heard.
But I have to
don't
ask,
know.
how many pages long is that promo that you're making?
It
I mean, how many
was,
different photos?
38 pages.
It's substantial.
So I tried to make something that people wouldn't throw away, but knowing that people would throw it away. I don't know.
I don't know. We just did a whole story about like how many art buyers were hanging on to things that like seem to tell a story or seem to have some substance to them. Yes. How useful is agency access? Putting together the dream list. How did you sculpt and carve out your dream list? Is that a good summary? Go for it. Answer the question, and it'll probably become.
Yeah.
Agency access or just making your own list?
Yeah,
So
which
I did use agency access / ad base. They merged, but I think the initial list I put together took maybe 3 weeks, almost a month of work, and I worked with assistants to help me, so it wasn't just me. I put together everyone who I'd ever talked to. Not in life, but in photo. And then any clients that I wanted to work with, that was pretty much it. Basically, people who I've maybe worked with on a little job and maybe they'll give me another job. So it's kind of a list of current, past, and prospective clients, and I still am working on it. So, but the initial building of the list is what takes the most time. So once you invest that time to make it, and you know, that's why it's important to have your vision kind of figured out. Is like, why is your work relevant to these clients? You don't want to be pitching to, I don't know, a sports magazine if you don't shoot any sports. Maybe, well, they might have a column that isn't sports related, but you have to understand that that person has to have a reason to hire you. So it takes a lot of research to figure out where these people are and what's actually in all these publications or what these ad agencies are actually producing.
Emily's 16-year-old had a good angle. By the way, this is not just a random plug for one of our sponsors, but Mark at CanSun recently did a nice seminar and talk about putting together portfolios that students found really helpful. We have a party to go to, which will be your chance to ask more questions of the panelists and of the sponsors. I'm going to take one more question, one more good, juicy question. Yes. Yeah, what's do's and don'ts about promotion, and what percentage of people that you hire came through you through promotion? But because we talked a lot about promotion, you wouldn't mind expanding, like, how do you generally, how you find photographers and how you don't want photographers to approach you?
How I find photographers, often I will get cold calls, and if I feel like cold calls, meaning through email, never call me. Ever. That was a mistake one photographer made not so long ago. I hope you're not here tonight. I thought it was my doctor. It was, anyway, it was like a disaster. Emailing me and saying, I think I might be a good fit, and sending your link. If I feel like you are a good fit, like, we'll set up a meeting to come into the office and have a little chat, show some work, or you might be in the right place at the right time. You might be in Nova Scotia when I need someone there. So, and I'll give you a call. Email. Promotion is similarly. I would say, while 90% of the things that I get in the mail end up in the trash bin, recycling. If it's something really special, if it's an image I've never seen before, if it's not a portrait of your best friend, smoking a cigarette outside your house, but maybe it is, and it's the best picture of a person smoking a cigarette outside of a house, that's something that can work. Personally, getting from the paper to my email is hard for me. So sometimes it's easier if you're just in the email, and then I can just put you in my Rolodex right from there. I've had people I've worked with say, hey, my cousin, friend, whoever is a photographer, I think you should meet with them. That can be tricky, but it's always good to try. And the percentage of people that I hire from a cold call, is that the kind of the question?
A percentage of people who you hire,
based on a promo,
promos or based on your own research.
Oh.
New hires.
New hires. Yeah.
it sounds like
It's
you are
mostly
digging
my own research.
your own research.
It's my own research. Yeah. That's a shame. I feel kind of...
It's all right. I'll set up a $1
yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's really time consuming, I would imagine, for you, but yeah. I probably suspect there are more questions, but you will be back out in the party. I just don't want to cut off that. Thanks very much for the questions. There'll be more time to talk to all the panelists except for Emily, who's actually going back to work. If you enjoyed this, I think that you should be thanking each of our panelists and thanking our sponsors with a round of applause, which you enjoyed.